The clone and stamp tool is finally here, so if you want something gone, then this is the tool you need. Now, she's a good sport, isn't she? So, the clone and stamp tool, it's finally here and it's been a long wait, but I'm really excited to actually have it inside Luminar NEO because it is just so useful. In this Luminar NEO tutorial, I'll take you through from the very basics of using the clone and stamp tool right through to some more advanced techniques. So by the time we're finished, you'll be fully equipped to go and remove any unwanted objects from any of your photos. Sound good? Now, while the clone tool is a really powerful addition to Luminar NEO, the idea behind it is actually really simple. All we're doing is it allows us to steal from one part of our image and then copy or clone that over another part of the image. And why would we want to do this? Well, there's actually two reasons. The first and the most obvious would be to actually remove unwanted objects. So copy one area of the photo over the top of something you don't want there. And the second reason would actually be to duplicate the object. So for example, if you've got an object in your scene and you want another one, you can use the clone tool just to duplicate it, and then you've got a second one. So that's a little bit about the tool. Let's take a look at it in action. To find the clone tool, we want to be in the edit section, and then we just scroll all the way down into the professional section, and there at the bottom you'll see the clone tool. If you don't see the clone tool here, you just need to come over to the Luminar NEO menu, come down to help, and just go to check for updates. And the clone tool was added in version 1.4, so as long as you're running that, you should see it. So through this video, I'm going to demonstrate how we can use the clone tool to really clean up this image. I'm going to get rid of all the unwanted elements, such as this stick down here, and get rid of all these people here who've spilled out of the train and obviously didn't get the memo that I wanted to get a nice clean photo of the train without people in it. So we're going to remove all of them. So how does the clone tool work? Let's take a look. As soon as we select it, we have this little message pop up on screen which just says click to select the source. So that's saying where do you want to clone from, i.e. what do you want to copy. So for example, if we just clicked on this little light at the front of the train, you can now see when I move my brush around that I have an instance of that light. And if I click and start painting, you can see what's happening. We're taking reference pixels from our light down here and we're painting them into the new area where we clicked and started painting. When we want to select a new source to paint from, all we need to do is hold the Alt key on Windows or Option on the Mac and then click somewhere else. So for example, if we wanted to start borrowing from this carriage here, and now you can see that my brush has the ability to steal pixel information from that area where we clicked. So it's a really straightforward concept, right? We're just borrowing parts of an image and then we're able to paint it somewhere else. And the three sliders that exist inside the clone tool are just ways for us to define the characteristics of the brush. So we have the size slider, i.e. how big the brush is, the softness slider, which determines the softness around the brush, and the strength slider, which is akin to the opacity of the brush, i.e. at what percentage are we going to see the pixels that we borrowed. So if you put it at 50, you're only going to see half of the value of the pixels you're borrowing. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, let's sample the light again, and I'm just going to paint one instance of that. And as you can see, my brush has access to that pixel information from there. Now, let's change the size of the brush and see what happens. You can see that if I was to start painting here, it's actually not enabled me to paint a new instance of the light, and that is because I was still referencing from this area. So until I come and resample this light again, I can't repaint that somewhere else. It's going to continually reference based on that initial source. So what I need to do is hold the Alt or Option key again, click on that light, and now I can paint another instance of that. And now you can see with a much larger brush, I'm going to click, and obviously the larger brush has painted more of it. What about if I change the softness of the brush? Let me bring that down so it's on 0. So now we should have a very hard edged brush. I'll sample the light again and I'll bring the size back down. Click once and you can see we have a hard edged brush. Let's bring that strength down to 50% or thereabouts, and we're going to click on the light again. Come up here, click once, and now you can see we've copied and pasted that light, but with 50% opacity. We can go over that a couple of times and build that up. So if I was to click once more again, you can see where we're overlapping, we're starting to build that effect up. So that's how this deceptively simple tool works, but how do we use it to get the most out of it in a practical real-world example? Let's see what we can do with this photo. Okay, first things first, let's reset this. The first thing I'm going to get rid of is this little post here. So let's zoom in, and I'm just using my scroll wheel on my mouse to do that. So the first thing you need to do is select your source, and I'm going to kick things off by showing you what not to do. Let's say we just want to paint some grass over the top of this. Well, if I was to come in, I'm going to reduce the size of my brush just with my left bracket key. If I was to start trying to paint over the top of this, you can see that our brush is set up completely wrong. So we looked at the softness before. We want to make sure that it's not a hard edge. We want a nice soft transition. So now if I start painting that, it's going to be a little softer edged, much better. Let me just resample from the grass here, and I'm going to paint over the bottom bit here. But you can see with the strength set to 50% or thereabouts, I'm not really getting anywhere, and I've got to go over in several passes. You don't want that. You just want to do it in one pass and have it done. So I find the most useful settings are to have your strength set to 100 and to make sure that you have a nice soft edge. Not necessarily set to 100, but you certainly don't want a hard-edged brush. What you want is a nice soft transition between your original photo and the newly cloned in area. Now I've shown you how to set our brush up properly. Let me show you where we should have sampled our source point from before I started that cloning. Let me show you that. Okay, let's reset that. I'll zoom in a little closer, and initially you saw me sample from this grassy area here. But when I painted the grass over this post, I was disregarding the fact that we already had a pattern existing in our photo, and that was this little dry area of mud that was running from left to right. So what I need to do is actually consider that when I start my cloning. So what I'm going to do now is actually click my starting sample source from this point right here, so I have access to copy this little dry area and paint that in where it matches and would logically carry on behind this item here. Now that matches much better, but we also want to make sure that we get rid of our shadow here. And so I'm just going to resample a point, come back to that area, that's pretty good. So we can basically steal from there and paint it over the top of that shadow. Let's use our little eye tool to see our before and our after. There you go, completely gone. Okay, now let's get rid of the next stick in the grass, which is actually going to be just a little bit more complicated because we actually have it intersecting with the tracks. So let me show you another technique that's going to help us get around that. Okay, again, let's zoom in. And when you're doing your cloning, you want to think about what logically makes sense to actually replace the item that you're taking away. And so for this instance, I don't want to be stealing the grass where it's in full sunlight because this area here is in shade. And so rather than sampling from up here and starting to paint that in, that just doesn't make sense. What I want to do is actually just borrow from down here. So I'm just going to come to the right slightly. I'm going to click here where the grass meets the shadow, and I can match that up here where effectively the grass would be meeting the shadow if this pole wasn't here. And now I can just start to paint up. And the fact that I'm getting a little bit of extra shadow popping up there, I'm not too worried. But this is a little area that's not going to work. If I was just to carry on painting up, I'm going to be stealing from this little bit of wood here, and that's going to be going over the top. So I need to resample. So what I'm going to do is actually look for one of these pieces of wood, this one here, that matches in terms of color and brightness value. So I'm able to just come in here, and when I'm sampling, I always look for a distinctive area. So for example, where the front edge of the wood meets the side edge, I'm going to click right on that corner there, and that enables me to match that up perfectly with the bit of wood up here. So I'm just going to bring the size of my brush down using the left arrow key, and now I know as long as I put my little crosshair over the corner bit of that wood, I'm going to be able to paint this in pretty much perfectly. Watch this. I'm going to click once, and as I move up here, I'm matching the side of the wood based on what I'm sampling from, and then I can just blend that in by painting a little bit of these rocks in as well. Let's have a little look at our before and our after. Before and after. Okay, let's zoom out and see our before and our after. No one is ever going to know that those posts were there. So here's a point to remember. You may have noticed that the shadow actually encroached slightly closer to the train track after we'd done the cloning. But when things like that happen in your cloning process, I say don't sweat it, because no one's got the original to do the comparison to. As long as it's believable to the eye, then don't waste extra time trying to get it exactly how it would have been. As long as you're getting believability buy-in from the viewers, you're winning. Now, before we get too carried away with the clone tool, let's just take a moment to remember our good old friend, the erase tool. So while it's got its shortcomings, where it really excels is saving you time when it's actually able to deliver the results that you want. And usually it can do that when it's not having to replace an overly complex pattern in your scene. So I'm going to give the erase tool a chance to see how it can do. And my recommendation to you before you go solely for using the clone tool or the erase tool is just to weigh up which one is actually going to be more appropriate for the editing that you're doing, which one's going to save you more time. So if you think that the erase tool might be able to do it, it might be worth just painting over the object, hitting erase, and see if it can actually get rid of it for you. There's no harm just giving it a whirl. You can always undo it if it doesn't work. So that's what we're going to do now with the people. I'm going to come into the essentials section, and here the second tool down is the erase tool. And so I'm just going to zoom in again. I'm using the scroll wheel on my mouse. And the first thing I'm going to try and get rid of is this little sign here. So I'm just going to paint over the top of that, come over and hit erase. Have a look at our before and our after. Yep, that's done a really good job. Let's try the same with these people walking up the hill here. Come over and click erase. Make sure I get the shadows here. And come over and press erase again. Now this is a good example of a trade-off between accuracy and efficiency. Clicking the erase tool got this done really quickly. However, you can see that the grass texture that it's actually applied here is not particularly accurate when you compare it to what's surrounding that area. And that's an example where if a quick edit is more important to you, then maybe the erase tool might be the best way to go. But if you want a little bit more manual control and be more precise about what you're actually replacing something with, that's when you'd opt for the clone tool. So from now on, seeing as this is a video about the clone tool, let me get rid of these guys using the clone tool instead. So we'll just open the clone tool again, and now I can click to select a new source, and I'm going to do this in passes, and I'm going to click fairly close to the area that I'm actually going to be removing, and that's going to give us more of an accurate representation in terms of scale and texture of the thing we're replacing. However, you want to be mindful of things like this. If I zoom in again, you can see that we've replicated this little tuft of who knows what and replaced it up here. So you really want to avoid recurring patterns, particularly in organic things such as like grass and bushes. And so you can just keep resampling from different areas, and that's going to break those patterns up. So I'm just moving my sample point somewhere else. For example, I'm going to click here, and now I'm going to start painting to get rid of this guy. Click a little further down here, get rid of this lady. Maybe click over to the side just to get rid of the shadow, reduce the brush size. Click over to the side here just so we can sample something similar to bring in instead of where that lady's walking, and then replace the bottom half with a little bit of grass there. Doing this kind of replacement is pretty easy, really. And if we scroll back out and press the backslash key, we can see everyone stood around on the grass there, getting in the way of my photo. And then as I release it, you can see they all disappear. If you don't have Luminar NEO yet and you think it would be a good fit for your photo editing, I've got a link in the description below and a discount code @NEO, and you're welcome to use that. You get the best price. I also get a small commission from that as well, so it helps me just keep creating this free content for you guys. The viewer's eye tends not to linger around the edge of the frame, and so I'm thinking for these guys here, we can get this job done a little bit quicker because we can be a little bit more rough and ready. I'm going to sample some of this grass here, which, yeah, it totally doesn't match what's there at the moment. However, I'm not going to concern myself too much with that. One of my rules when I'm cloning is if I can get away with doing it quicker and save myself some time, I will. Okay, let's zoom into these guys, and this is certainly going to be a little more challenging. First of all, I'll get rid of these guys on the grass because that is still an easy task to do. And I've started repainting that guy. Let's get rid of him. So to get rid of this guy's legs, you can see I'm actually sampling from an area where we've got a transition between the grass and the little pebbles there, because that's just more believable. If we started trying to sample from just this grassy area here and painted over him, it's just not going to look right. And that works really well coming in from this side. However, when we get to this wooden beam here, we're much better off coming up and actually sampling from another area of the beam that has similar dimensions. So we want to bear perspective in mind. Like, we wouldn't want to come down here and sample this bit because it's actually wider than the wooden beam we have running behind him. See, if I start painting that, it's too wide. And so what we want to do is sample pretty close to him so that the perspective is similar, and then we want to come along and actually line this up. So we wouldn't want to start by sampling over here and then start painting and then hope that it lines up correctly by the time we get to the wood, because that's just not going to work. So you select the wood itself, something distinctive, so that little line there, and now I can marry that up with the line that's already there. And now when I start painting, we should be able to get away with this quite nicely. Now, for getting rid of his head here, what we could do, we could either sample a bit of the train and start painting that out so it leaks into the grass, or this is one instance where we could get rid of the softness of our brush, so we've got a much harder edge, come in and just borrow some grass. Let's borrow some from out here, and so we know that we're not going to start sampling something we don't want, and we can literally just paint over the top of that bit. I'm getting a little bit of shadow there that I don't want, so I'll just add that in. Zoom back out and no one would ever know he was there. Let's have a little toggle of our before and our after. Before and after. Now, listen up. Here comes my most important tip when we're using this tool. And hopefully in the future this will become irrelevant. But at the moment, as you know, there's no Control-Z to undo things. So what if you make a mistake while you're cloning? If I was literally to do one wrong stroke with this, I can't undo it, and that's going to affect all of these other changes that I've made, all this painstaking work I've done. And if that happens to you, you're going to be sat there just pulling your hair out. So please listen to this. Once you've cloned something out and you're happy with it, close the clone tool down and reopen it. That is going to hard bake what you've done into Luminar's edit history, and then when you carry on cloning with a new instance of the tool, if you make a mistake, you haven't lost what you did originally. Oh, I know, it shouldn't be like this, but it is for now. So hopefully this will be rectified in the future, but for now I strongly recommend that's the way you work. So taking that approach, let's do that now. So all I need to do is click on the clone tool. That's going to close it down, and if I jump into the edit section, there you can see we have clone, clone, erase, clone. So these are the different instances of the tool that I've done so far. So if I jump down to the erase tool, you can see all of the people back there. And there's some more people that I got rid of, and if I come back out, you can see there are those posts. And so after I've done each of those erases or clone removals, I'm opening up a new instance. And so now if I come into the clone tool, and let's say that I make a mistake, let's say I start painting some red over that guy by mistake, and I'm like, ah, no, whoops, mistake, and I reset the tool to undo it. Had I not have closed the tool down and reopened it, I would have lost all of those changes where I removed those people from the grass. And if that happened, you would be seeing a grown man cry. Okay, I'm going to crank the softness of my brush back up, maybe not 100, 72 is fine. And I'll just get rid of these guys using the same principles. Okay, let's close that clone tool down. Again, sending that into our edit menu so it's still there, it's protected, and we can open up a new instance. And this is going to be slightly harder because what we're going to be doing is replacing machinery, and that's so much more difficult than replacing organic entities such as grass and bushes. So this is where it's really important to adhering to matching up the geometry. So we've got this straight line running underneath the train here, and that transition from the red paint into the underside of the carriage. So basically we just want to make sure we're sampling from that line, and then we can match that line up. We can click once, and then we can just start painting over the top of that guy. You don't want to start repainting him in. So I'm just going to steal a little bit of the carriage from there. Again, match it up with the line that runs through there. I've put the sample point on this line, so I can come in, match that up as best I can, come down here, again sample from the bottom. We can do the same with this girl here. I'm just going to sample from this area of the train this time. And come up here, I'm going to make the brush a bit bigger and also increase that softness, this time to about 50%. Click once and just make sure that I'm painting her out, and now I'm just going to smoothly transition that down into here. Let's have a little look at our before and our after, getting rid of those guys. Okay, we're on to our last two people. Now to get rid of the person here and make sure that I'm matching up the geometry again, what I'm actually going to do is actually borrow from the windows here. So I'm just going to click at this little corner part here, and now I can come over and kind of match that up as best I can with the windows there, but I'm not actually painting the windows, it's just so that I can make sure that we're going to match up the actual carriage itself. And this area here where we've got the step is actually pretty difficult because on this carriage here we've actually got a bit of curvature going on where it comes around the corner here. So what are we going to do? Well, all we need to do is look for a similar matching area, and so I'm thinking this carriage here has the same kind of thing going on, and so I'm just going to steal that from here. And the only thing working against us here is the fact that the perspective is going to be a little bit different because the carriage that we're borrowing from is further away. But what I'm hoping is if I just steal that little bit there, no one's ever going to notice. And now I've got quite a large area where the curve comes around here, so I'm going to start to borrow that and just start to paint it over this guy. And I'm just going to come down until we start reintroducing him, and now I can come back to the top, and that's going to give me the ability, once I start painting down, to borrow even more from that area. And I just put a click there that I didn't want, so the Control-Z really can't come soon enough in my opinion. And then we're missing a handrail, so again we can come over here just to borrow this one from here. So I'm going to make sure that the brush is only the width of the handrail itself, make sure I'm putting it in approximately the right area, and there we go, we can paint that in, shadows and all. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. And as a final step, I'm going to make use of Luminar's Remove Power Lines tool. So I'm going to click that, it's removing, and hopefully it's going to get rid of these three lines here. And there you go, the unwanted objects are removed. Let's have a look at our before and our after, before and after. See you later, guys who so rudely got in the way of my photo. And by the way, just let you know, I do still love my wife. I wouldn't really send her away. If you guys want to see another video, you can click that one there, or click the subscribe button that's probably covering my wife's face right now. So I'll see you in the next video, and we're going to have some tea, shall we?
Yeah.
You know, somebody will be like, why are you trying to remove your wife?
You say because she's annoying.
Yeah, I would say because she's annoying.